All right, welcome everyone. So we're about to start the cultural activity for today. And what we'll be working with is within that Google document that I dropped. And I already see some of you copying this, which is fantastic. So the prompt will be, we're going to be doing some, working on some poetry in a sense, right? Of sharing a little bit about ourselves. And so to do this, just like you can see here, I'm going to just ask you to actually copy all of this. And then somewhere later on in the doc, you can insert, for instance, a new page. We'll just insert. And you can either do it this way and insert new pages, but we'll go ahead and just drop a bunch of pages in here. It should be for each of you set to edit, but to claim a page in here. So to claim a page, and we'll just take a minute here to do that. You could also make a copy of this doc if you'd like, and if you'd rather. I'd be absolutely fine with that. No need to necessarily work in the same doc unless you want to share your result or your resulting poem with the others. So this is an activity that's inspired from the I Am From poem. It's adapted by Levi Romero's Where I'm From, that is, which is an adaptation of actually George L. Lyon poem. And so in this case, it works similarly to if you're familiar with the activity of a Mad Lib, where you're filling in the blanks, and by virtue of doing so, you're ending up with a narrative of sorts. And so in this case, I am from, and then you would choose an everyday item in your home. Right, and fill in that blank with an everyday item from your home, and then from, and then another, and then so it'd be products or everyday items from your home again, and then we go through. So this next blank then is a description of your home, and then the next blank is a detail about your home, a smell, a taste, a feel, something of that sort. Please feel free to take the liberty of the exercise too if you want to play around with what you ultimately fill in. But the idea is to give us a sense of something related to home. And I would extend as well as it, please feel free to extend that, right? We all have very different orientations to home. And home means something very different to each and every one of us. So this could mean quite literally a location, geographic location. This could be a sense of community. This could be a number of ways that you interpret it. So I'm going to ask that you do this. And this would be, for instance, I'm not sure who's this one. Whoever anonymous otter is that's typing right now, just put your name up at the top so we know it's your poem. And then we'll claim the space, and each of you just take a space here. So again, this would be your name, and go in here, or copy the document and work in your own document. But I'm going to put on a song here, background music, and we'll see if you all can get through in this in just 2 minutes, or 2 songs, that is. So it'll be about 2 minutes each. And we'll see if we need a little bit more time. But then I'm going to open up the floor for us to actually start sharing some of these. But I'll put on some music. Yes, question.
Yeah, so how do you work collectively on the document? Because I usually make a copy, but if you want us all to work on the same one.
Yep. Okay, so I'll repeat this one more time. Great question, though. And so you'll copy it, and we'll just
go. Oh, I see.
Yeah, okay, great. If you can take the liberties, I can just do a bunch of them right now, but go ahead and just.
Oh, I see. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yep, you're welcome. Great question, though. So I'll just insert a bunch, but if you're at the bottom, just go ahead and insert page break and add a page. And of course, if you would rather work in your own document, please feel free to. But I think I just dropped, maybe there's about 10 in here right now. So just go ahead and grab a page. I'll put on some music, fill this out, and then we'll go ahead and have folks who are comfortable share their resulting poem. That was a great question. Any other questions? All right. And I will also say is, of course, this exercise is written in English, though I know many of you also speak other languages at home natively. So please feel free. This is your poem, so make it what you want it to be. So I'll just open that invitation for those of you that want to leverage this exercise to express a bit about yourself in whatever way you would like. All right, I'm going to put on a little bit of music. And we'll play just about 2 songs, as I said, and we'll do a check-in after that, see where we're at. All right, I'm going to do a check-in. How are folks feeling? Do they feel like they need one more song? One more song. All right. Also, yes, sorry, I was so busy looking at what folks were writing, I neglected the chat. We are working in a Google document. And so this will be something you can engage in asynchronously as well or get caught up with here. But that's that Google document. And so just copy one of the templates and find some space in that doc, or copy the whole doc and fill out that template if you'd like to share a story, a little bit of a story about who you are or where you're from. All right, so we will have some time with this, and I'd love to make some additional space as we go forward for folks to share this as willing and interested. But I'll go ahead and start with one I had written. I've done this exercise a number of times, and it's one of the things I love the ways in which it helps me think about the things in my past and my upbringing. So I'll share one of the ones that I had written. So where I'm from well-worn blue and white running spikes, from pogs and slammers and Space Jam basketballs. I am from Maine, the way life should be, and carnival-filled Julys, avoiding the fried clams while consuming as much fried dough as possible. I am from tall Seattle ponderosa pines, whose sturdy branches galvanized me with endless imagination and venturousness. I am from bunk beds and Game Boys, from Puffalump and Billy the Blue Power Ranger. I am from sticking black olives on our fingertips at Thanksgiving and triple scoop chocolate frozen custard atop a regular cone on opening day. From taking your shoes off when you enter any home and debating the superiority of hot dogs versus hamburgers, hot dogs, beans, or chicken burgers all the way, P.S. I am from waking up to stepfathers yelling, "Time to make the donuts," and bop, bop, do bop on cassette. I am from Philip Pullman and Beverly Cleary, and learned that everything means something. From candied yams topped with golden roasted marshmallows and Luna Park's malted milkshakes. From savor the flavor and moms like you choose Jif. From the widespread use of personal computers and pleading with our parents to play Math Blaster, Myth, and Doom. I am from the scent of a coming rainstorm miles away. I am from the synchronized clicks of oarlocks. I am from endless sweet layers of everlasting gobstoppers. I am from water-soaked running shoes and after cross-country puddle runs. I am from these moments, these places, and people. I am from nowhere in particular, but rather everywhere and everywhere along the way. I am Maddie Shelburne. All right, so I'll open the floor. Does anyone feel like they've gotten to a point where they would like to share those? And it's okay if you'd like to hold or if you want a little bit more time with this. But if anyone got to a point where they're feeling like they're able to share, I'll open the floor to you. And no worries, Chris, if you're still on this call, I saw your chat message there. All right. Well, feel free as willing and as interested to share, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on this activity. I know a few of you in the chat had private messaged me, and likewise, Diana had said that she liked this activity. But what are your thoughts on this? and the ways in which it asks us to think about the variety of aspects of our upbringing. So things like actual slogans, to memories, to phrases, to the things around us. Has anyone ever done this activity before? Curious if folks have. Yeah, Jennifer, Summer. Yeah. Any thoughts, reactions right off? Let me know in the chat as well.
I found it difficult.
Yeah. What about it was difficult for you?
I don't know, to like just define myself through it, these things. Like for me, it would take me a while to sit here and think about everything, because I feel like it's kind of like, if I shared it, I would have to be sharing like kind of who I am. And so I'd want a while to sit with it and think about how I would want, if it was, I don't know, I would want a little bit more time. So like it accurately reflects who I am. And I think that would require a lot more time. So to me, it was really hard to do it. I was like in blank 4 when you said time was up. Like, so that's why I couldn't share, because it was it wasn't enough time for me personally.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I agree with that.
I found it challenging to like mentally switch gears. Like, this is a work day. Like, I'm working, I'm getting stuff done. Boom, 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 boom. Finishing a meeting. And then to come in and be like, okay, what am I supposed to do? I'm supposed to answer things. Okay, I can answer things. I was like, wait, I'm not supposed to just answer. I'm supposed to let my right brain be creative and come at this from a little bit more of a gentle flow and meander. And it's like, I just couldn't switch gears and get into that reflective meandering space, just boom, like that. So like you, Lamia, I was struggling to get my brains around what's really being asked of me, and then to internally switch gears so I could go down that path. It was fun. Don't get me wrong. It was just that was a challenge.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Summer, you had unmuted. Did you want to share as well? Or?
Just thinking about, like kind of tapping into that, and like what others have said, the challenges, and kind of tapping into that and getting in touch with who you really are, and what experiences shape that. And, we can definitely pick and choose, and there's always the good and the bad and everything in between. But like, what story do I want to tell? Looking at my authentic, genuine self, what are those parts and pieces that I want to pick and share those with everyone else?
Yeah. Scott.
What I like about this, and again, it is an introduction, right, into a reflective moment, is that most stories consist of people and places. Those are ingredients, right? And when we're asked to make stories, it's hard, because it's like too big of a question. It's like, if you have children, what was your school? What did you learn in school today? Well, I don't know, right? But if you can ask a specific question to activate the movie or mind to like wander around a room. Nunabina, my grandmother, take me back to the room that when you first brought my mom home. What was that room like? Oh, Madonna. We had the furniture from your father's mother, and she covered it in plastic, and your mother hated the plastic and she chewed it, so we called her Plastic Biter, right? Which is a great little story that I never would have got unless I asked her, walk me through this place. So when you see those blanks, we immediately want to get to a theme or a grander narrative, because we're performance based. And school has taught us to be performance based and not participatory. So we need to sit with those categories and, what was that home like? What was the warmest place in your house? And then, really just sit with those ingredients. And what's fun about the template, you plug those ingredients in. And how many of you have actually did Mad Libs as a kid? They can be really kooky, right? Because the answers sometimes are way out of whack, but that's the fun of it. So I think the spirit of this is, one, it's a memory framer, which also can be triggers. So there's positives and negatives to that. But I think it's like sitting with those ingredients, and then it really something doesn't become a story until those ingredients, go through some type of learning process, I would argue.
Yeah, Carl, I see your hand raised as well.
Hello. For me, I have done this activity before, but I did it during one of my NASPA groups. They gave us 30 minutes to do this one activity. So I didn't cheat. I didn't look back at my old one, but it was to help promote Latinx healing in our identity exploration and to determine how we can reconnect with our culture and learn more about ourselves. So similar to like what Scott was referencing to, thinking back to those roots of our lives and where we stem from. And then the other part is just as a fun snippet, when I was looking up what Connecticut was known for, I was just like, it said wiffle ball. And I was like, well, that explains why every single school had a wiffle ball set growing up. Also the Frisbee. So fun, like little fun things that you're like, well, where did this stem from? Like a local pie company that was like 15 minutes away from me creating a Frisbee that connects to my childhood that now many people know as like a child play toy or an adult play toy, but it's cool to see those stem.
Yeah, thank you for that. And yes, this poem has absolutely been leveraged for in a variety of spaces. Absolutely, Kristen. There is the recording as well. You can follow up on. Hold on one second. But yes, we were working in this Google document. We're working that Google document and just talking about the activity broadly speaking. But yes, thank you for that, Carl. And Sam, see your hand raised as well, and then Jennifer.
And mute here. Yeah, thanks, Maddie. I start jotting down some stuff, and then when you read yours, I gave up.
Gave up sense of how? Why?
I don't know. I can't. It's, yours was so crafted. I think I wrote down, I am from, what is it? Where? Right here. I am from college land. I am from library land. What is it? Large, noisy, and kept alive by the music band. I am from the pine trees, icy mountains and desert land. And then I go on to say, I don't know, someone hears me, it sounds kind of, yeah. If I am from I talk about chicken shawarma and hamburger bun. I think for me, it is a struggle because we belong to, in the context of intersectionality, I think we belong to different memberships. And when you try to summarize the human experience into a single statement, which is what you're asking for, it's difficult. And so I was struggling whether we're talking about our own experiences or the context in which we are working. And sometimes we get consumed by what we do, and that becomes the sole identifier of who we are. And so I think for many of us, this is why this little task is a little bit overwhelming. So that's all I wanted to say.
Yeah, absolutely love that, Sam. Thank you for that. And I thought yours was amazing.
Oh, thank you.
It's amazing. Jennifer.
Good morning. I wrote in the chat, I actually used to do the Georgia Ella Lyons poem when I taught K-12 and had the students fill out their own where I'm from based on hers. I wanted to say I really like this one better because this one probes in different ways and pulls out different pieces. So it asked me to think about things differently. And I'm really interested in hearing people's when and if people are ready to share. I think we'll find out a lot about all of us in some really cool ways.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, one of the things that I appreciate about this activity is the ways in which it just asks us to reflect about sense of self, the very things that you were talking about, Sam. I love that it makes space for you to think about those things, right? For us as a group to think about those things and the ways in which we even introduced this. I will say that when I have even a more personal adaptation of this activity where I'm really critical of the fill in the blank prompts, right? So what if everyone, and we even heard this echoed in the chat, or at least expressed in the chat, but that sense of like vulnerability that this type of activity asks us to enter into, and in such a public way if we were to share. And again, it was not an expectation that you share. I'm okay that no one shared, apart from Sam, which was amazing. So thank you, Sam. But that we need to set up and think about how we tend to each other in that way, and what we do or don't make space for. And likewise, right, if who was it? I think it was, I hate when I cannot remember who made a point. It might have been, I'm not going to try to remember who it was, but whoever made the point about that some of these prompts can actually be triggering in that sense as well, that if maybe I don't have a person that means something to me. And I've now been reflected or prompted to think about that. I know for me, sense of home is, I don't, right now I call Michigan home, but my sense of home is variable. It depends. It shifts. Thank you all for engaging in this activity right off, and for that reflective start to our day. I do know that as we continue on, and if any of you do sit with this more, so if you're like Lemia and feel like you need actually a lot more time with this and want to take that time, I absolutely encourage you to do so, and encourage you to share for those that are willing and interested. I will say for those that are perhaps as well, it might get you to reflect about the degree to which, or I suppose your relationship to completion. And that one of the things that I hope that this activity, as well as the remainder of the activities that we engage in throughout the cohort, really gets you to sit and reflect on is that stories aren't complete, right? That they are iterative, that they are constantly negotiated and constantly moving. And every single time I have personally done this activity, it's different every single time. Something new comes to mind, something different comes to mind, or perhaps I'm wanting to share a different part of myself, depending on the group that I'm sharing at that given time. Or to Sam's point, perhaps I'm wanting to reveal a part of myself, or perhaps I want to hide it entirely because I don't feel safe to. So if you were to do this and do it again and do it again and do it again, I encourage you to try out different things in those prompts, in those blank spaces, and see how it fits with the expression of yourself that you want to share with others. Or perhaps you just do it for yourself, and then that's okay as well. So looking at our schedule here, today is a little bit different. We have just shifting into a break right now, which I know is an early break. But we have we have a space for guest storytellers on your side again at 10:15 here. And then our actual guest speaker is going to be hopping in at 10:30. So we are formally going to move into a break now. And I know that's a very early break, as I said, but nevertheless, gives us a little bit of space to still have a break, still walk away, or navigate away from our devices and then come back in for programming. We will maintain that 15-minute break. I'm a pretty big advocate for actually taking a 15-minute break. So we'll reconvene here in 15 minutes. That'll be 10:17 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time on my side. 10:17 Eastern Daylight Time on my side. All right, so I'm going to put on a little bit of music as always, but otherwise I will see you all back in here in a couple minutes, or 15 minutes or so.
Hey, Maddie, and if you need to step away, I won't bug you, but I'm obsessed trying to find this link.
Yeah, 1 second, Scott.
I know. I'm just being, I'm sorry.
Nope, I'll find it for you. I just need to tend to a message that I was just sent. So I'll be here, but just give me about 1 minute.
Hi. Hi.
Hi, Jonathan.
Good morning or
Good morning.
afternoon or whatever. Yeah, sorry. I couldn't find the link at first, but I found it. So
All right.
I missed your whole preamble and introduction, but I'm sure that.
Oh, no worries. We're just doing some initial brainstorming around the possibilities for this particular SDG. And we got everything from thinking about like actual energy sources and what interpretations of modern could look like, to some discussions around and the challenges just therein for energy, like genuine real challenges that we face, like load shedding, and whole moments of time where electricity just is not available as a result of regions of the world shutting that off for a bit.
Perfect. Well, that does sound like good prep for my talk, which is going to be weird, I assure you. Hi, my name is Jonathan Lashley. I'm the Associate Chief Academic Officer of the Idaho State Board of Education. I'm joining you from Boise, Idaho, in the United States. And Maddie, do I have permission to share my screen?
Yes, you do now, Jonathan.
Perfect. I like slides, I think they're helpful. Okay. So let me just get everything organized here. So Maddie asked me to come and talk about SDG 7 on affordable and clean energy, which you all have been talking about. I went through IELOL Global last year, had a heck of a time. And this is a topic that, if you know me, because I know a few of you in the room, you know that I do a lot of work with open access to digital learning content and the intersection of open and online learning. And so it should be no surprise that that's a good portion of my talk today. But first, let's see, here we go. So in the United States, there's a region that I've spent most of my life, and it's this green region here. It's referred to as the Intermountain West. It is mountainous, it's rugged, there's a lot of rivers, and there are a few types of renewable energy sources that I'm very familiar with. Arguably one of my favorites and one of the earliest I was introduced to were these guys, riverfish, and specifically trout. And I was brought up to not only learn how to fish, but also really appreciate fishing as an excellent food source, as well as a source for other things. For instance, making bait to catch other fish or other aquatic creatures. Or we would also take guts and entrails and bones and chop them up using this fertilizer, these sorts of things. And so growing up, especially in the mountains of Colorado, trout were very plentiful. This in particular is a steelhead trout, which they are super weird. Just like if you're familiar with the Pacific Northwest, we also have a lot of salmon, and they're also very weird in that they can live in both saltwater and freshwater environments. And what that means is, and what that's vital to, is their migratory patterns for reproduction. And so the way we have an abundance of fish is that they're able to take this very long and winding journey into the inland west and the inland northwest and make new fish. So that is one I love, and from the energy perspective, it gives us energy, and it nourishes those of us who eat fish. Another well-known energy source in the Mountain West, and especially the Pacific Northwest, is hydroelectric power. As I mentioned, there's a lot of rivers here. I went to school in Western Washington in the Pacific Northwest, where they are continually researching and trying to find ways to harness things like tidal power by putting turbines at the bottom of the Puget Sound. And this specific dam is in the lower Snake River, and it generates not only a lot of power for the state of Idaho, but also neighboring states. There's a whole series of these. They also, they regulate waterways and There's sources of water and energy, not just electrical energy, but they help us sort of maintain a lifestyle as humans that we're accustomed to, especially those of us who live in Boise, which is the one metropolitan area of our state. And importantly, this energy source is in direct conflict with the energy source I mentioned earlier. In fact, we've had recent conversations in our state specifically that have been leading toward the destruction of these dams to ensure that salmon and steelhead can migrate because their population numbers are dwindling. And hydroelectric power, though it's a clean energy source, though it's a renewable energy source, and by clean, I mean, and this is true for any clean energy source, there's still some sort of environmental impact, right? Whether it's batteries using precious minerals, whether it is, as I mentioned, hydroelectric power and the effect it has on marine life, and solar and birds and the metals that are used to make turbines. But the important thing about clean energy is that it's cleaner than conventional energy. But in order to scale it up, it also still becomes problematic. And like I said, that's threatening the existence of these living things that are, have been resilient for hundreds and thousands of years, and to which we've all come to depend on. And so this conflict itself between renewable energy sources, as well as the importance of focusing on what's small and natural, intuitive, something like the act of fishing and enjoying fish as an energy source, makes me think about open access, and specifically open access digital content. You might have seen this logo before. The idea is that open content is licensed in such a way that it can be transformed. This whole slide presentation has featured open licenses because all the content I'm using and all the content I'm putting out there and sharing with you is intended to be not only observed, but taken, and if license is given and affordances are given, you can transform it. And it can also buoy you in your own similar or dissimilar efforts, however they might be. Great examples, common examples of open access content and online learning is a big one, or increasingly prominent one, is open educational resources, or OER for short. But we also have open access library journals. We have myriad ways to ensure that content that is educational or can serve an educational purpose, which many of us would argue all content can be educational given the right context, that ensuring access is an important thing, that ultimately access to content is the energy that drives online and digital learning. And more often than not, at least in my experience, you can find the clean energy or renewable energy aspects of open content at a pretty small scale. And I often use this bit from Stephen Downes that he wrote in 2007 when I'm talking about the topic of OER, in discussing just its general sustainability. The use of a learning resource through adaptation and repurposing becomes the production of another resource. Though there's a steady stream of new resources input into the network by volunteers, this represents not the result of an OER sustainability project, but the beginning of it. The idea is we're generating content that encourages other people to generate content. And I really want to emphasize here, there is a network of individuals that make OER spread and grow. It's environmental. And to that end, a lot of these open projects are quite small. They're what you might consider unsustainable without the network, because usually it is a voluntary effort. The general support that we have or are able to give from our institutions is inconsistent in terms of, is open access work scholarly? Is it something that we can support financially? Is it something that we can resource well at our institutions? And so inevitably what ends up happening is this river full of open content projects comes along and meets some sort of institutional goal or sustainability project that says, we need to scale this. We need to make it bigger, and we need to make it unified and uniform so that we can capture all of this good work that's creating additional access for our students and importantly, access for course creators and course content creators as well. And there are certain members of the open education community that harken around this notion. This is also a fairly common economic notion that small is beautiful, but big is necessary. And if you've ever read the book, Small is Beautiful, that is kind of a direct confrontation of Western capitalism, you recognize that this impulse comes from the idea that we need to scale in order to be a good commercial enterprise in what we do. The inefficiencies are not what we're in the business for. And it's hard to say that this doesn't exist in higher ed to a pretty strong degree, especially in the United States. And so what this actually means in practice with OER is something that looks more similar to this, where yes, you may have this large scale endorsement or enterprise to support open access content, but it also now embodies these activities where you're closing access to some degree, you're gatekeeping in some way to ensure that access is the same. Doesn't mean equitable, doesn't mean that it's giving people what they want at scale, but you're realizing some sort of scale, and that definition of scale needs to be protected. And so it's this weird conundrum or paradox where open projects, in order to reach scale, become increasingly less open. And we see a lot of examples of this. Some are really well-intentioned and exist within institutions. Some of them are more market-driven, like what publishers have been doing in terms of, you might have heard the phrase open washing, the idea of taking a bunch of open content, putting it into a big software wrapper, and then charging for access to the software wrapper and saying that really it's the ancillary materials, it's the quiz banks, it's the assessment structure that we've built. That's the important thing, but don't worry, the content's free. And so we're able to say at a lower price, you're able to get most of the access that you would have wanted. But also this halts the sustainability project in many, many ways. So this leads me to an activity that I have for all of you today. This is an activity called a TRIZ, and I got it from the site Liberating Structures. It's also based on a book. If you've never used any of these, I highly recommend them. I remix TRIZ activities on a fairly regular basis because I think they're really helpful. Specifically TRIZ, the whole idea is that we are building or making better outcomes through creative destruction of what already exists. And Maddie, I didn't get a good sense of how many people are with us today. And so I'm trying to figure out how best to conduct this, because we can do breakout groups and that might be the most effective.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got, sorry, I was just working on some stretching here. So I'll put my video back on.
So
we have about 25 here, Jonathan. So if you want to do breakout rooms, absolutely, I can set that up for you.
Yeah, I think just, and they can be random as well, because really what we're going to be making is lists. And so hopefully that's not too destructive to your individual workflows right now with the computers. But what we're going to do is we're going to, first of all, take a question that has a very undesirable outcome based on the story that I just shared. And we're going to build by destroying toward that goal. So our goal today is to really scale learning resource access to death. And so the question I pose to you is, how do we effectively scale learning resource access to death? Learning resource access is the energy that we need in order to teach and provision and deliver online learning in meaningful ways and reach students exactly where they're at and ensure that they have day one access to materials, because to not have day one access to materials can put a student at a distinct disadvantage. In this context, I'm sure is just as similar as it is different as we think globally about this particular question. So with that, the first step is that I need you as individuals and as small groups in your breakout rooms to make a list of all the things that you can do to achieve the unwanted result. And again, that result is scaling learning resource access to death. And Maddie, do you want to assist me with setting up the breakout rooms on this?
Yeah, how many would you like in each room, Jonathan? And also I want to draw your attention to a question in the chat.
Sure. So because there's 25, we could do groups of 5. Let me see the question here. I'm not sure I understand the question. Materials that discuss death. Oh, thank you. Thank you for the question. So ultimately, how do we scale learning resource access, access to learning resources in such a way that it actually inhibits access? And so going back to the example that I showed, if we're utilizing if we're, say, delivering an open educational resource initiative, and it's built off the back of a bunch of individual OER projects that faculty have undertaken and departments have undertaken, we're trying to wrangle it within an institution, and say we partnered with a publisher to deliver it across all of our campus, then we have ensured that that type of access can be delivered at scale at our institution. At the same time, there are probably concessions that we made that are going to have ripple effects. It's the idea of a dam is scalable access to power when you dam a river. At the same time, there are still ecological effects. And so by taking these smaller projects and trying to make them big and all-encompassing and homogeneous, what gets left behind? What ultimately dies? To borrow from my earlier story, it was fish, which is deeply unfortunate. So does that help clarify? Yes, too much. Too much is a great part of my idiomatic phrasing. That was my oversight for sure. So we will let's see, it's 8:47. We'll take about 10 minutes and we'll tackle this first step, and then we'll come back and tackle the next step.
Right. Breakout rooms are officially open.
Okay, so see you soon.
All right, just put a broadcast out, Jonathan, just letting them know. For those, a couple of folks hopped in right away. So let them know we have 10 minutes. All right. Let me know if you need any assistance in getting to a breakout room. If you've navigated away from your device, no worries. I'm going to move Paulina. I'll move you to that room. All right, Paulina, you should see that invite now, if you did not see that prior. All right, perfect. Oh, there we go. I know Christina was on the move, Jonathan, so likely will be in the room. And then Tahani and Awiya, if you need any assistance, or Melissa, just let me know.
And it occurs to me, Maddie, that maybe the better move, well, I don't know, if we stop breakout groups because you assign them at random, will it reassign them at random if we try to open them again?
I cannot remember if it keeps the same rooms or not.
Because I'm wondering if it would actually be better to instead just message them over the chat in their breakout rooms with the next step.
Yeah, you could also hop into each of the rooms.
Okay, yeah.
You could do that as well. Which might be a good a way for you to just check in with them and then not have to rely on the broadcast, which I think some folks are really good at tending to, and others are so into the dialogue that they miss it.
Yeah, I will do that.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and pause the recording for those of you watching this back, just because we are in breakout rooms. Don't want to have just that silence of the main room on the recording. But I'll go ahead and start it again when either Jonathan enters the room for some dialogue or we re-enter as a large group. So I'll see you back here shortly.
Because the language, they're trying to put, some of our committees put Switzerland and Austria and Germany together, and then we have a collaborative initiative to try to do that. And right now that's not working with the OER. Like Germany has theirs, Austria has theirs, and because Switzerland has multi-languages, they need French, Italian, German, and English in the schools. That's kind of what's happening there. So it's really interesting to see this huge like warehouse elephant OER in America, and then Germany's starting with kind of little small things and wanting to go that way. So what Jonathan was talking about in our group was kind of cool. Was like thinking, well, maybe you don't want to go that big, why put it all in there if nobody can find anything, right?
Yeah, if you have a massive repository and no one ever uses a piece of OER in there, does it exist? Oh. Paradoxes. So I've made a little bit of room. I'd love to hear kind of what emerged as you were talking about how you could scale access to learning resources in such a way that it becomes undesirable.
Quality and quantity are inversely proportional. So increasing quantity sometimes leads into chaos. And that's one, I don't know, I was trying to say this in my group and I think they kicked me out. They thought it was too good of an idea to keep me on. And I don't know, where is Michael and Scott? I think they owe me 32 seconds. But anyways, when I think about scalability, it has to be sustainable. It has to be, we have to kind of account for this binary, the dimensions of quality versus quantity, right? There's also this, in my view, the idea of fair use. When you make something that's accessible to all, then at some point you're going to run out of the producers and you're going to have consumers. Over the period, the last 2 years, like Khan Academy was a great resource for faculty, for students, and I think now they give me a hard time when I try to access something. They want money, right? They realize it's a business model. There is this concept of supply and demand. And because a lot of demand over the past couple of years, for virtual space, I think they're like, what, we're valuable. We need to charge money. So there's there is these two concepts: quality, quantity, and then fair use. Who can use it, and what does that look like?
Well, and I'm glad you led with quality and quantity, because both need to be maintained, and they're maintained in similar and different ways, right? So the Khan Academy is the Khan Academy example is a great example, because even if their intentions are still good, and they're like, we have good content, we want to maintain as much access as possible, monetizing it is going to now give us the ability to update content and maintain it for quality purposes, and also produce more content to ensure there's an additional quantity. Because in order to scale, you also have to scale all of the apparatus that basically makes free content an expensive endeavor to pursue. Well, that's great. So something else I want to point out with the group that I joined that first session was this sort of exercise can be really uncomfortable at first for a lot of us, because many of us are in positions where we are leaders and we're problem solvers. And so if we're given a problem, we immediately just want to solve it. And instead, this is asking us to actually be just real nefarious actors and ensure that the worst case scenario comes to pass, which is not always the most natural path for us. But what's helpful to that first step is what we now have in the second step. And I'll just share my screen briefly so you can see the title slide. Step 2 is now we're going to go back into breakout groups, and we're going to list all of the things that we currently do that resemble the items on our last list. So all the things that we currently do in our work that could lead to unwanted scale, in the sense that scale is, we talk a lot about its importance and sustaining its importance. But at the same time, if we're getting to a place where it's so logically extreme that it's causing problems ecologically for maybe other efforts, surely there are things that we do that lead to that end right now. And so with that, Maddie, I'll ask you to do some breakout rooms again, and we'll take another 10 minutes.
All right, same breakout rooms. So feel free to go back into those same rooms. We'll see you back here. Jonathan, how much time do you want to give him for this one?
Let's do another 10 minutes. I think.
All right, 10 minutes. All right, and just for sake of the recording again, I'll just make this announcement that since we are in breakout rooms, so go ahead and pause that once more. Did you hear anything that I just said, Jonathan?
Yeah, I
All
can
right,
hear.
perfect. I think I muted myself, then unmuted myself, and muted myself really quickly, so quickly that I second guessed whether or not I was on mute.
No worries.
All right, 15 more seconds here, Jonathan.
Okay. What's nice is these second two steps, they kind of bleed into one another, and that was already happening with one of the groups I was in.
All right, breakout rooms are officially closed.
Great, welcome back everyone. So to the group that I had joined briefly, kudos, because you did sort of anticipate the third step. And it shouldn't surprise you that we'll devote a little bit less time to this activity, but you've had some rich conversations about current practices that might be leading toward negative scaling ends. And so let's devote another 5 minutes or so with your small group. You probably won't cover every item, but what would be nice is to have a conversation about these practices or programs or activities that you've been talking about that might be part of the problem. How could you stop them? Or how could you modify them to not be as disruptive or destructive? And so with that, this is our last breakout, and then we'll come back for a discussion.
All right, just like before, breakout rooms are officially open, same rooms. And for the sake of that recording, I'll go ahead and pause this one more time. So if you're watching this back, please feel free to engage in this activity similarly. So we'll have a space for you to do so. All right, all those watching the recording, we've just moved to close the breakout rooms. So they have 46 seconds and then they'll be returning to the main room. All right, Jonathan, breakout rooms are officially closed. You're on mute at the moment, Jonathan.
Thanks, I forgot that it means me when I come in. Well, great, so I've really enjoyed these conversations, and we don't have a whole lot of time for a greater discussion, but I do encourage you all, and I realize I didn't provide my contact information on these slides, and so I hope, Maddie, that you can share it with whoever asks for it, because I'd love to continue this conversation offline after this session as well. But now I just wanted to open up to discussion. I'll give you a title slide because I think it's helpful, but given the conversations we just had in these breakout groups, how should we ensure access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, modern, and I cross out energy here, except for this is directly from the UN, learning resources for all? And we don't need to get down into what does modern mean in this context. I think generally we've been talking a lot around delivery and around digital resources. But if if ensuring access to affordable, reliable, and sustainable learning resources is good, and we need to scale it in some way, how should we do so without having some severe ecological consequences? Any ideas?
Hi, I have an idea that I wanted to share, and it's like with these like discussions, like I have the idea that we can like being a part of this massive goal, because the question is very big, you know. Maybe you like, how's your impact to the SDG, and you say, well, how can I have an impact? And then you think about the things you do every day, and it's like every little impact you do in things that maybe you can address in a different way. It's like for me, it's like you open a new door and you say, well, I can do sustainable content, affordable, and for in a lot of aspects of my job, you know. And that's what I wanted to share.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I think that there is a variety of different pathways we can pursue, tributaries and streams that we can pursue, and making time and space for that, I think, is really important, instead of just trying to align everything. The compulsion is always to align, I think, in our work, and importantly to scale, because scale is easier to measure, because we can also wrangle all the different measurement factors that come into place to ensure that we're doing what we're supposed to be doing. But as many groups have discussed that I joined, in times of crisis, that can also be a fool's errand that really just pours fuel on a fire that's already burning. I'm mixing so many metaphors now, but the idea is, maybe when we're in the midst of a crisis, the opportunity to explore a variety of new and novel modes of delivery with different names and interpret them institutionally and departmentally in different ways is maybe not the best approach, despite the ability to do so at scale. Someone else want the last word on this discussion? Well, my take on how we should ensure access is, I'll share one more slide. Share. There. Focus on the fish, that small is beautiful and that living things are important, all living things. And so to really think about what is the human burden, what is the burden on those living, breathing, working, thinking, ecological factors, whenever we're trying to decide whether scale is actually necessary. So with that, my thesis is to just make sure that whether you're thinking about energy policy or you're thinking about open access content, don't be a slave to scale, if you will.
Thank you so much for that, Jonathan. We have a lot that we can sit with that and reflect. We are currently at 11:30 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time, so that does mark the beginning of our group reflection. If anyone does feel like they need to step away from their device or navigate otherwise away from their device for whatever reason, please feel free to do so. I know we took our break earlier in the day, so feel free to do so here if you need a break. I mean, we were flexible in that way. But one of the things that came to my mind a little bit earlier, I didn't articulate it as well as I wanted to prior to Jonathan hopping on. And Jonathan, please stay for this if you have the time. We have 30 minutes here for a group reflection. But is in thinking about also opportunities to share energy and share resources. Certainly not something we've talked about yet, or at least I was in the main room, so I didn't have the affordance of being in your small breakouts. But I had mentioned a data set earlier that I will find for you now that I've gone on to thinking about it while you were in breakout rooms, but just around lack of Wi-Fi, lack of data in whole rural areas, for instance, in the southern United States. And there's an awesome conversation we had with the presenter that was dealing with that data around, well, what do we do? What do we do about this? And I was thinking, well, what about my rollover data? Like, what if I could share that? That'd be so cool if there was some sort of sharing and lending service where I could just donate my data every single month instead I don't need that rollover data. And it makes me think a lot about in our field how, we've talked already this week about sharing resources. Someone had mentioned that we are I think it might have been you, Michael, had mentioned this in the chat. If it wasn't you, then forgive me for annotating this, but just how we're notoriously bad at sharing. We're so siloed. We work in siloed natures. And we don't even have the infrastructure. If we were to imagine a system of sharing energy, sharing resources in that sense, so that we can be more sustainable, then we have to look at the infrastructure as well. So I don't know if that at least helps to prompt any of you, but have you done any thinking around that in relation to this idea of sustainable energy? Because we also don't have endless energy. I don't know if anyone has noticed today, but I'm actually quite tired today. Today has been a hard day for me so far, just in terms of being present and having a boundless energy. I don't have it, right? And so I have to negotiate that as, do I just be my authentic self and be like, oh, I'm having a rough time of it today, right? I'm tired. But we don't have a boundless energy, and that's something we already explored across 2 sessions today. But beyond that, how do we ensure that as part of that sustainable practice and thinking about the ecology and the other things that we might be affecting within our choices to move sustainably forward, to also not neglect the potentials that come out of sharing of resources and sharing of energy, which I know is hard. It's hard to, at least tap when everyone feeling overcapacity. So not sure if folks have any thoughts on that or additional thoughts from your breakouts that you'd like to surface into a large group. But that was something that came to my mind as I was listening to you talk, Jonathan, about what would it mean to share tributaries, right, and not be so protective over our own land and the sense of ownership around our resources.
I have 2 thoughts. One, I want to give a shout out to Jennifer's mentioning in the chat about the relationship that her home solar panels have with the greater grid in Texas, which is an independent grid. And if you're not in the United States, you might not know how problematic that can be. But this year it's been very problematic, at least twice. But also what comes to mind, Maddie, in what you were describing is another issue that I didn't really linger too much on with regard to the dams, in that the groups that are most vehement against the dams coming down right now in the lower Snake River in Idaho, they're coming from a place of, it's hard to call it anything else but privilege. It would be disruptive in the sense of they care most about their own lived experience with relationship to electricity that's just assuredly there. And passively, the idea of, well, hydroelectric power is relatively clean. So like, don't we want to preserve every bit of hydroelectric power that we have? What it also fails to recognize, however, is that there are some populations within our state that have never had meaningful or reliable access to that same power source. And a great example is our 5 tribes that exist in Idaho. They have power, but it's not the same sort of stable and assured relationship that we have with our power companies within, off the reservations. And furthermore, what ends up imposing on the culture of the tribes is how deeply and historically tied their cultures are to fishing and to the migratory patterns of these trout and these salmon going up the Snake River. And actually, a lot of our reservations and tribal lands are located along the river for these reasons. And so prioritizing the interests of one group over another is certainly a healthy and productive exercise in this, and trying to figure out who is prioritized, who is privileged, and can we find equity where it doesn't currently exist.
Just real quick, Maddie, and I apologize, Jonathan, I missed a lot of your talk, but when we were in our groups, I think some of the discussion was around OERs, and I find it interesting that so my university is pushing those pretty hard right now. I think it's a combination of things. One of the biggest things is that it reduces the cost to the student, right? And we're, where we are as a nation, especially, going to college can sometimes be the tipping point. So I get the idea. What I see though is a big resistance to OERs, the use of OERs, and a huge resistance to sharing. So, I'm a course coordinator for one of our general education courses, and I flat out tell people they can copy my Canvas course. when they first start teaching, they can have all my PowerPoints, I don't care. And they are shocked because most, and I'm speaking only from my experience, so I don't want to group anybody else, but at my institution, most individuals are very hesitant to share. And so I wonder, if this is like, that's going to be kind of a roadblock here for any kind of sharing of resources, is that and a lot of instructors, because I switched to the online version of the text, which cuts down the cost substantially. It's like $50 as opposed to $200. So, and I had some people within that course refuse, and they still use the text. So, made in that kind of old school version. So I see those kind of things as major roadblocks. And I'm wondering if it's going to change over time, just as, a new generation comes in, or what's it going to take to kind of take away those roadblocks so that we can successfully start sharing and providing the resources our students need at a lower or at no cost, really.
There are so many rich things there, and it's your experience is very similar to mine. And I want other people to be able to respond as well. But one thing I'll point out about sharing is that academe, and really the institutionalization of higher ed, at least as I understand in the United States, doesn't have a good reward structure for sharing. In fact, competition is much more common on our campuses, and this whole topic is pretty close to my heart because my doctoral research was on the professional reticence of faculty. Ultimately, the idea that the best way to ensure that you have academic freedom is not to tell anybody else what's going on in your class, even if it's insanely successful and it's building really great learning relationships with your students. The idea is protection is valued, and protectiveness is valued, and so that ultimately undercuts any sort of efforts around sharing. And then if the institution isn't willing to reward it, and what it's recognizing, if academic leaders or institution leaders are recognizing that faculty are resistant to something that seems like a net positive, like OER, that is affordable, that does create day one access and long-term access for students if they want to use it, the sort of like superficial gloss of OER, then they can scale without faculty. And this is what ends up happening. Then they partner with third parties to come in and deliver the OER that the faculty are unwilling to share. But in many cases, and often this is the case at our institutions, faculty are already doing work that is open or open adjacent. I mean, even what you're describing in terms of sharing your course, these are common practices, but they're not great for scaling because the reward structures can easily become exploitative.
Diana, you had your hand raised. I'm not sure if you still wanted to contribute.
Yes, I just wanted to follow up in our group, and thank you for that. Lamia, Tarek, and Esther and I talked a lot about this OERs. And one of the things that we said is that there's a lack of knowledge about OERs among faculties, as much as creating courses online. We talk a lot about instructional designing, but also there's a lack of and a misconception of OER. So if we educate our faculty saying, hey, your next book could be published in OER, you still get credit for publishing, but it's going to be free for the students. Yay. And also that intermediate Spanish class book, you can find a similar resource online. And, having workshops, having these little spaces where they can learn about this, it will be beneficial. So that's the suggestion I have. Another thing that I did is I started using it myself. And so when the students came very happy and say, I love these resources that were free, then, it makes departments and the whole university think. So we just got a survey that asked us, hey, how many classes did you taught last semester that were open resources? So they are taking step towards making us use open educational resources. And I think the resistance comes when we don't know that it can also be beneficial as much as online courses. But I'm gonna let my colleagues talk as well. Thank you.
Diana, something that I love is you've pointed out the importance of emphasizing open practice over open objects, in that talking about whether it's open publishing and being able to make a clear and deliberate link that your scholarship is going to be valued if it's published openly, just like it would if it was not published openly. That's one, but also just getting your hands dirty and trying with it. Like, this is where, again, applications of open content can be small, but that's where meaning derives, because inevitably there's nothing innovative about OER in itself. What's innovative about OER is the digital affordances we have with delivery and open licensing. But the idea that we would create content and distribute it and share it with others to learn, or importantly, I come from writing studies where this has been common pedagogy forever, co-creating instructional materials with students, super commonplace. But it's hard to know that without practice. And often what ends up happening with our institutions or with those of us who are in positions where we have to scale open educational resource efforts is we're forced into a position where we have to treat it like educational technology. And then we end up following models around educational technology. And so it seems like this alien thing, this new novelty that we're saddling people with, when in practice, it's actually a very familiar form. And to ignore that actually gets us in the trap of this sort of ed tech change management malaise that everyone should feel, because I think it's very common for us on our campuses to be inundated with, we need to adopt the new shiny thing.
And Jonathan, just real quick, a couple things that you were talking about was scalability and academic freedom. It's funny, we, with the 2020 happening and everybody switching, they started making Canvas templates, and which, you know, we're fine, they're great if you're new to it. But the big thing people kept saying is, now you're telling me how to teach, right? Instead of saying we're providing you quality ways to you know, because this is all wrapping up, Maddie. Finally, I'm getting the connections to like some of the other SDGs, and we're talking about quality, which is a huge thing for me because of the poor quality that was put out last year, and understandably. But when we give them a resource, then they start to feel attacked, right? That we're taking away the academic freedom. So it's just interesting. It's just, there's another dynamic into it of how do we provide these OERs and benefits to our faculty when people are resistant to it.
Yeah, so a lot of my work now is focused on education policy. And so, as I'm sure you can imagine, I'm a very popular person with our institutions, our academic community. However, the way to have a structured and productive conversation, whether it's with policy or templates or any other sort of guideposts that are intended to help others, is, and this takes a lot of conversations because all of this is about relationships, but it's setting it as a baseline, recognizing that a template is only ever a baseline, it's not a ceiling. And so in the cases with those faculty, I don't know what requirements there were around the adoption of those templates, or what sort of professional development or agency they had in adapting those templates to meet their needs. But it's this negotiation that is periodic. And in my mind, if we're going to invest in anything, I'd rather invest in the relationships in those negotiations about how to continuously improve together, instead of investing in a silver bullet, like single solution that says, okay, now we're just going to mandate that this course design is the best course design until we update it. We pay to update it eventually and make it the next best course design. I don't know, it's messy. All of this is super messy.
Michael has his hand raised, but I also wonder, Jonathan, if you saw Diana's question in the chat.
Yeah.
Oh, perfectly.
Diana, I put together a really simple and probably a definition that has blind spots. But generally, when we talk about scale, and I was at a leadership institute last week with OLC when I was at Accelerate in DC, and it was just a very common practice for a lot of the leaders in the room to talk about scale. And they knew that they were talking to an audience that also talks about scale on a regular basis. And so at no point did anyone feel compelled to defend they're talking service to scale. But it's really the idea that we found a solution, we found a practice, we found a goal that everyone is striving toward because it has some general positive feature. And even just saying that and giving that definition, I think about how flawed our relationship is in leadership positions with the prospect of scale. But it's because ultimately we are trying to facilitate community. And you want everyone to feel like they have a seat at the table if you want to have effective and robust community.
Michael,
Thank
did you
you.
still have a comment there?
Yeah, and it goes back a little ways, but it's when Jonathan said this whole sharing isn't a new thing. That was something that really hit me, because I thought immediately back to the K-12 teachers, where it was just normal to make a copy of whatever you were doing and hand it to the teacher across the hall, and the new teacher that got hired, and the new person that was going, and somebody who's teaching at another institution and people would make copies out of their books. But as soon as things became digital, people started feeling a little bit differently about them, and not everyone. But I noticed that groups that I had worked with that would think nothing about making a copy of half of what they've created and handing it to somebody immediately started, and not all of them, I don't want to say it's all, but some of them immediately started thinking of, can we wrap this in a piece of technology and put it out for sale? And I'm like, but you've given it to thousands of people over the last 3 years. Now, because it's going to be online, we need to bundle it and sell it. And I think that's an interesting kind of look at the way people think about this. And that idea of us being very market driven. We are resistant to sharing, and we're also resistant to change. And I think this is kind of tapping into both of those areas. This is a change in the way we do things and asking us to kind of give without the expectation of getting back, other than just good old-fashioned credit for doing the work.
And something that you also raised, Michael, that I see on a regular basis with our institutions, and it's just the nature of governance and funding structures within our states. In our state, we've never recovered from pre-2008. In the United States, we had a recession in 2008, and it gutted a lot of funding for public institutions and agencies, and we've never gotten back to above 2008 levels in Idaho. And so what that means is that one of the things that's incentivized among our academic community is entrepreneurialism, being entrepreneurial and being a fundraiser, or bringing in some sort of not only just name recognition, but also monetary confirmation that your work is valuable, and bringing that back to your institution. And if that's the case, then once again, sharing thing for sharing's sake is undermined.
I had dropped this. I don't want to, it's related to what you're just saying, Michael. And so I certainly don't want to sit with this if folks aren't interested in talking about this piece as well. But that monetization is something I think about a lot. So when we set, I'll be transparent about this for this group, but when we sit with and even thought about what do we charge for IELOL Global as a program? That was not an easy conversation, right? If you were to look at, for instance, other academic institutions and affiliations, Stanford has a leadership program, for instance, it costs over $2,000. And part of me wants to take it to see what they have, right? But I think we have this driving association. I know I certainly do. I was just looking at speakers for a teenager. It's his birthday today. So my wife and I were on the internet last night looking at speakers, and one cost over $3,000, right? And immediately I was like, well, that must be the most amazing speaker ever. But why, right? I think we have such a strong association between price, between the supposed market value, and the quality of something. And I think that is hugely part of OER. I would be curious if most folks would see a free resource and assume that it therefore is not high quality. And so curious if folks have had that kind of, I know at least in the US, that would be a really dominant perception. So curious if that's the case around the world as well. Jennifer, I see your hand.
I had a very kind of personal relationship with this, in that I worked with some collaborators to contribute to a peer-reviewed chapter in the very first completely open access annotated Canterbury Tales, because my master's is in medieval English lit, because that's helpful. And what was interesting was that when I came here, the person who actually takes care of and curates the official Chaucer bibliography for the Chaucer Society, I asked her why that wasn't in it. And she just said, yeah, we don't do anything OER. And I said, but it's peer reviewed and it's got all this. I mean, it was a really amazing collection that we all worked really hard on, and would not even look at it. If it was OER, then it was just not up to the standard of everything else.
Michael?
Just really quickly, as soon as you said that, my immediate thought was, isn't that the same way a lot of people look at online learning? Where they're like, well, yeah, you're going through all the same motions and you're doing all the same stuff and you are getting to that same end result, but it's different. You know, and that's that stigma that I think needs to change in society.
Sammy, I thought that might be you because I saw you on mute. Go ahead.
All right. Yeah, there is, if I make an analogy with the business world, I know, like here I'm overseas, and I've also noticed, at least in some stores in the US would take whatever food, leftover food, and donate to charities. But when I think about OER, I see literally people who are hungry, but there is tons and tons of food, delicious food that gets thrown into the garbage every night. And to me, I think there is an element of control, supremacy, and just status quo that I have the resources and I rather dump them in the garbage than share them with people, because we don't want to lift people out of, you know, whatever situations they're in. And I think this really kind of ties in with this framework of academia. We have this elephant in the room, the accreditation piece. And to Michael's point about online education, how dare I went, I was privileged enough, not me, but generally speaking, the folks who are opposed to online, I am privileged enough that I was able to not work and attend college face-to-face. Now you're telling me, as a single mother or a person of color who live in marginalized neighborhoods, and you're telling me you can hold a full-time job and attend college online, I have a problem with that, even if it's probably higher quality than the face-to-face environment. So there's an element of control, there's an element of greed in that, you know, way of thinking, right? That online is not really best quality, but we don't want you to kind of have the cake and eat it too, you know, or somehow you went through a career that was not successful and you're coming back now for your RN and going into your MSN and you're doing it fully online. I have a problem with that, you know. So there are many issues going on with that. There's the issue of privilege, and people want to preserve their privileges, right? Whether that's through this academic piece or online or sharing resources. And I think it manifests in that way for me.
Absolutely agree with you. Esther, yeah, go for it.
Two things are happening in our university towards this OER. One is the cutting down the cost of the space as well as electricity. And so most of them are turned to be online, working from home. And the other one is that about the online courses. We create interactive courses online, and we collaborate with university in India. And so students, they enroll for these courses, and they take the courses and do the online exam. But it is kind of in the analysis mode. So these two things we do at our university from 2020.
Thank you for sharing that. And I look forward to hearing more about that because I think that we could certainly leverage sharing of models and how folks are moving forward with OER. All right, anything else? We've got about 4 minutes in this particular part of today, and I do see your message there, Robert.
I wanted to no, just let me, wanted us to look at probably the next time, what is the mechanism of sharing? Say we should share. I mean, have you considered the cost of sharing between the ones who have so much and the ones who don't have anything at all? Because that's very important. It's not just sharing. What mechanism do you use in this sharing? Or, you know, the individual who has so much food, throwing it away, even transporting that food alone will cost more than what is thrown away. So what's the mechanism? We need to think about that. Are there any easier, affordable means of doing the sharing? It won't bring in additional costs that will become prohibitive for the investor that want to share.
Yeah, any responses for Robert?
Yes, I have to join the meeting, so probably I'll get my response from Madi the next time. Thank you very much. I think it's very interesting joining the discussion, and wish you all the best for today.
Thanks, Robert. Yeah, and we'll capture the response to that question here on the recording for you.
Okay, yeah, thanks.
Michael, go for it.
Just really quick to what Robert just said, I shared in the chat that I know organizations that throw food out, and that what Robert said is exactly the reason, is the cost of keeping everything at the required temperatures and limits and time limits and all of that, and that was required to get the food from where it was to the people that needed it became so expensive that it would have been cheaper to buy new food for those people than to move the existing food over. So it became not uncommon to see like pounds and I hate to say it, but like 25 pounds of pasta that was cooked 3 hours ago go into the garbage. And fresh fruit that came in, and it was on this was for a school specifically, that came in and it was on a Friday, that 4 cases of fresh apples would go into garbage because we couldn't use them again on Monday. And we weren't able to give them out to the community because of all of these possible repercussions, at least in our area. And I think those costs are a legitimate concern. What other policies, things that you need to consider to give these away for free?
Yep, absolutely. We have some great questions in the chat here as well. So I'm also loving the food waste metaphor, Jonathan. I'm like, I'm so glad we went here. But
I feel like I just barely scratched the surface talking about my story of learning how to gut a fish at an early age and learning to preserve all of it because we use it for different things. But you all have done a phenomenal job in taking this to a degree that I definitely want to utilize, and I will give this collective group credit.
Oh yeah, I know Angela would be loving this conversation as well. And I was just thinking too as well, Diana, I'm not sure I actually know where that reference was from. Does someone know what Diana's inquiring about? Did I miss something?
Somebody was talking about, can you hear me?
Yep.
Somebody was saying that now the lady who has kids and the university is offering classes online has now issues with classes being online from this big institution. And I didn't understand why the issue. I'm so sorry. I was driving, so probably that's also a cost.
No worries. That was, I actually think, part of what you were sharing, Sammy, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
About just,
yeah, Diane, I don't know, maybe it's just, I'm usually negative on Wednesdays, but on Thursday, that happens too. I think it's just part of that preservation of privilege. Basically, in terms of social structure, like I said, if I was able and privileged to attend education and get an academic degree that allowed me to provide for family and live in nice, and by nice, you know, upper middle class neighborhood. And I know that education is a vehicle for upward mobility. And if you get that same degree, a doctorate and whatnot, now you're competing with me over these same resources, then I'm going to have a personal and a professional opposition to that. That's what I was going with that, Diane. That because they're viewing, and by they, I mean those who were privileged enough to get a degree in a face-to-face environment. And now most universities do not have a traditional college students who come right out of high school. At least, in my opinion, even if they come out of high school, they're juggling multiple bosses. They're on a scholarship and they have to do athletics and just trying to please two bosses. So they don't want to see someone get an education, a similar degree. Hell, I spent 4 or 5 years going to college face-to-face and did not have any income. And you now have an opportunity to do that while having a second job or doing it from the comfort of your couch. I have a problem with it. So I think these are the deeper causes, deeper roots of why online has always been viewed as less quality and so forth, at least in the humanities. I know some degrees like engineering and like if you're doing medical school, you had to be in person, but that's what I was trying to go with that, Diane.
That's perfect. Thank you so much. Now I understand. Thank you. Thank you.
I want to just draw attention to not to stifle this conversation by any means, but we're at that point in our programming where we're going to shift into our optional social half hour as promised. And yesterday, for those of you that were with us, I'm actually going to grab lunch today. So I've got a snack next to me. I'm going to encourage each and every one of you to do the same as well. For those that need to hop off, this is a really good moment for you to do so in transition. But if you want to stay on, have some optional social gathering, grab a snack, eat a lunch, you name it, this is the time for it. And as we do that, also, I think there's quite a bit we can expand on here as a whole group, and food waste metaphor and tying things together, which is becoming very evident, right? I think in a very nice way that we predicted that these SDGs are not isolated from one another, that they are inherently connected. But it's even got me thinking too about, I don't know if everyone across the globe is familiar with this, but was it the Freegan movement? I believe that's what it's called, right? I'm not mixing up my words. But folks that actually seek their main meals from waste piles, dumpsters, and the like. But I know a lot of folks, my family included, would never imagine doing so because of the fear that it would be bad quality. So the links between all of these pieces, all linkages that we will. That's where the rhizomatic assemblage that Angela mentioned. Bye, Jonathan. Thank you so much.
Thanks everyone. It's been real fun. But
it's part of the very core of the anti-narrative part of the framework. The storytelling framework is it's visibilizing all of the connections that we might otherwise have gone on not thinking about. So I'm going to stop the recording. Thank you for those watching us back. We look forward to seeing you next time.